how crazy it is. This reality began a month ago when he was summoned to a world called Dungeon. He was walking down the street when suddenly he felt something strange. A blue light appeared under his feet, and as he watched his hand disintegrate, he wondered what was happening, and then he vanished. Transported to a secluded forest, he arrived to see several people in front of him. Everyone seemed confused about what was happening. As he wondered what this place was and why there were so many people, he realized they had all been teleported out of nowhere and their phones no longer worked. He turned when he heard someone say, "Welcome to the dungeon." A cute rabbit appeared, saying it was a pleasure to meet them and that it would be their guide in this game. It said it knew they must be wondering what kind of game it was. The protagonist and the others seemed confused by a talking rabbit. A man in a suit walked toward the rabbit, demanding to know what was going on. Angrily, he said he didn't care about this game nonsense because he was late for work and told the rabbit to stop hiding in that costume while spouting nonsense. The rabbit insisted it wasn't nonsense because the information was very important and they were the only ones there. It asked everyone to listen carefully as it would explain the rules. Suddenly, the man in the suit grabbed it by the collar and told it to shut up. The rabbit said a game tutorial would come first. "Learn as you die," it declared, waving its arms, announcing this was the dungeon game, while the protagonist told the man to wait. The rabbit then said it would discuss the important rules to satisfy the hot-headed man. The protagonist thought it was a dream until the rabbit commanded everyone to respect the game guide. With a deadly swipe, it decapitated the man, stating they should value their lives. That's when the protagonist realized it wasn't a dream. Excitedly, the rabbit asked if everyone understood that ignoring the rules meant death. The people panicked, disbelieving. With a sinister look, the rabbit said there were 100 of them and asked if it could start the real game called Learn as You Die. At that moment, the protagonist understood it wasn't a dream. It was the reality of the dungeon game. The protagonist's legs began to tremble, and he fell to the ground as everyone fled in disbelief. The rabbit said the surroundings were dangerous and that, as the guide, it would provide basic equipment. With an abracadabra, a blade with a purple aura appeared before the protagonist and various other weapons materialized in each participant's hand. As the rabbit hopped excitedly, people began to believe it was virtual reality. The rabbit said they could interpret it however they wanted but asked if they could start now. It said they should begin by surviving as long as possible. The dungeon game starts now, and so the dungeon game began with monsters attacking from all sides. Deadly traps claimed lives. Bodies piled up on the ground. As time passed, more people lost their lives due to a moment's distraction or mistake, and they had to start killing each other to survive. Someone kicked the protagonist in the back. He said that was all he had to eat, but the man said he was a useless member of the production class. Those belonging to the combat class were protecting trash like him, so if he commanded to give something, there should be no backtalk. The players had another type of weapon called abilities. They granted special powers like in a game, and most people received combat abilities. However, the protagonist was different. In his status window, the only available ability was to purify impurities, an apparently useless ability since it didn't aid in combat, and the most he could do was detoxify the meat of animals or monsters. The man said the protagonist should be grateful, and that he would already be dead if he hadn't been parasitizing their group, eating without even helping in fights. But then, a man with long hair appeared, asking what he was doing. This was Seoenji Woo, who said the food would be distributed tomorrow. The man, with a nervous smile, said the fights had been extreme that day, so he thought to recover some life, but Seoen said there were no exceptions. With a threatening look, he told him to wait until tomorrow. The man left frustrated. Seoen helped the protagonist stand and asked if he was okay. He then called the protagonist by his name, Diayuan, and told him not to mind what was said, because everyone was on edge these days. Diayuan said he didn't care, while Seoen walked away, telling him to rest because the guide said they would reach the end point tomorrow. The protagonist thought to himself that he also wanted to help. He summoned his blade and began to train. In the morning, a scream was heard. The group was running from a giant boulder. The bunny guide flying above said they would have trouble if they only looked ahead. It warned of many traps around. Seoen was running with his group, and when he heard this, a trap exploded where they had been passing. Some members are hit, but he yells for them to keep running, dodging the traps, and not to fall behind because if they stop, they will perish. Diego is panting and thinks he's reached his limit. He tries to keep up with the group, but his vision starts to blur. At that moment, he steps on a trap, and the ground begins to sink. With a look of shock, he lets out a cry as he falls into the hole that opened in the ground. Seung, concerned, shouts for the protagonist. The little rabbit says the effect of the seventh trap is incredible, and that there was a surprise waiting below, while a man with an axe says this is madness. The rabbit then says that this trap had a 0% chance of survival. A boy with a bow shouts to Seoeng that they can't waste time as they see the boulder rolling towards them. Seoeng apologizes to the protagonist and yells to be careful with the ground as the group starts running again. The little rabbit follows them and says he thought Seoeng was close to the protagonist but confirmed that he has a cold heart. Seoeng mentally apologizes again to him. From the bottom of the hole, Dae-yoon can hear a voice saying that it's been a while since the survivors got there. The protagonist realizes he can hear the rabbit guide's voice since he's still alive. As Daeun summons his blade, the guide asks if he hadn't mentioned there would be a boss, and then introduces the final boss of the phase. Fallen and bleeding among the thorns, Daeun believes his journey ends here. Outside, the group faces the boss, a giant stone golem, which falls after a blow from Seon, and it shatters into pieces while the rest of the group celebrates defeating the last boss. Then the rabbit appears, congratulating the group. He says it was impressive that, tattered as they were, they managed to defeat the boss, especially Seon, who remained strong even without one arm. Sweaty and panting, Seon asks if they can go home now. The rabbit asks why they would return, and with a malevolent smile, they say to enjoy the weather and move on to the next phase. Seon asks what he's talking about, and shouts that he had said they would clear the dungeon after the boss, but the guide says they only passed the first phase and calls for the next dungeon. The other nervous people wonder if this was really just the first phase. The smiling rabbit asks if they really thought that was the end and apologizes for forgetting to tell them, and then says this is just the beginning of the dungeon game, and that it wouldn't be fun if it ended with just one phase. So he asks why they are reacting like amateurs who have never played before. Seong looks irritated as the guide repeatedly says they have no time to waste and must learn as they perish in the dungeon game. The guide asks why they look like that. Seeing everyone fallen and indisposed, he asks if they are really tired, and then says it's time to distribute the rewards for passing the phase. Immediately, all the group members start to feel better. They realize their wounds are being healed. Even Siwang's arm has been fully restored. The guide says he looks better with both arms, and that's the reward for passing the phase, and says to continue to the next phase while the protagonist fallen in the hole also begins to be healed. A system window appears showing the reward for completing phase 1. He then realizes his wounds are being healed, and wonders what the heck happened. When he hears the guide saying they will all go to the next phase, he tries to shout, asking to be taken with them because he's still alive, but no one hears his cries. He then wonders what he should do alone there, when a system window appears saying the dungeon is resetting. The ground begins to tremble, his blood on the ground begins to disappear, and the opening of the trap begins to close. Dae-Yuman remembers there would be other players, and realizes the reset is to prepare the dungeon for the next ones. After the trap was completely closed, he picks up a stone, and throws it to activate the trap and make it open again. But then he realizes he has no rope and could fall on the spikes again if he tries to climb. He starts to think of a way out, when he hears a voice asking what the meaning of this is. The rabbit appears asking why Dae-Yuan hasn't died yet, and says he came to check because the trap was activated on its own and asks how he survived. Dae-Yuan then explains it was the complete recovery of the survivors, and this leaves a look of astonishment on the guide. He says the protagonist was supposed to die as soon as he fell into the trap, but Dae-Yuan just wants to return to his colleagues. The irritated guide says it's not that simple, and asks Dae-Yuan to show his status. In his status window, there's error in place of his name. The guide confirms his suspicion and says the dungeon rules consider the protagonist as dead. In a brief moment of hope, Dae-Yuan asks if he's no longer a player, and if he could go home, but the guide says he must die there. Dae-Yuan is shocked and asks how he came to that conclusion, but he only says it's obvious he will hide the irreparable errors. He then calls the protagonist Mr. Error and tells him to die of hunger. He asks if Dae-Yuan was the production class player who hid behind Seung, and says that with that class he has no skills to get out of there. The guide says it wasn't just that trap that reset. He starts flying to the exit, then says that even if he gets out, he will face hell above, so he tells the protagonist to die alone without bothering the other players. Dae-Yuan shouts, asking him to wait, but the rabbit keeps flying and goes away. Alone in the hole, he thinks about what he was told and wonders why he should die just for being from the production class. At that moment, he remembers the other guy who called him useless, and that they are all damned. While opening his inventory, he questions whether they really think someone would perish just because they were told to, and says not to underestimate the players of the production class. He takes some meat from the inventory, takes a bite, and declares he will survive no matter what. Seeing some fish bones on the ground, Dae-Yuan sighs with relief, knowing it's been almost a month since he last ate in peace. But then he starts to wonder what to do next, since climbing is difficult and there are monsters to face above. He stands up and gets an idea while looking at the ground. He decides to dig an escape route to the outside. He calculates that he can dig down a bit to distance himself from the rocky walls and then change direction to start ascending. Dae-Yuan questions if this is a reckless plan, but then he tells himself he doesn't have much choice and that any place is safer than that hole. So he begins to dig. Inside the tunnel, he's dirty and panting. However, he finds digging fun and wonders if he's going mad after so many dangerous situations. His hands are forming calluses, but he says it's for his own survival. Some soil sediments fall on his head. He realizes he could get buried if he doesn't manage the soil he's already dug. Then he gets the idea to try putting the soil in the inventory. So he opens the inventory and puts some soil in it. He celebrates the practicality of the inventory when he sees that it works. Now digging will be much faster since he no longer risks being buried alive. He continues his excavation, throwing the soil directly into his inventory. Looking at the inventory, he realizes how much he's dug and says it's 1,000 times better than running around trying to survive. Suddenly, a light starts to shine, and a system window appears saying he's gained a new skill. The protagonist is surprised by this. The system window says it's generating a new skill, and Daun feels something completely new and incredible, a sensation as if he could shatter anything. The system window shows the skill Expert Digger, saying he can now dig better. The protagonist falls to the ground, a bit shaky and confused, wondering why such a skill exists. The system says he can dig faster according to the level, but Daun says this skill is embarrassing and wonders when he will receive a combat skill. But he soon realizes he gained this skill because he dug a lot. Then he laments that he won't have any amazing combat skills like Cung's. He looks downcast and thinks about how he was a burden to Sion, who even lost an arm to save him. Daun then hopes that Cung is alright despite not being the type to die easily. He lifts his gaze and decides it's time to test the efficiency of his new skill. He activates his digging skill and forms a ball of soil in his hand, looking somewhat confused. Meanwhile, in the trap hole, the rabbit guide appears again. He's annoyed because he told the protagonist to die quietly, and then he wonders what Daun is doing down there. The little rabbit starts entering the tunnel, thinking the protagonist is just wasting energy and wonders how far he got before dying. But the tunnel keeps extending, and he realizes that Daun dug quite a bit. He's impressed with the protagonist's determination and willpower and realizes that Cung wasn't the only reason he survived for so long. Continuing forward, he says it's not like Daun has become a mole, and that his body must be nearby. But he starts to get startled to see that the tunnel is wider, and he's shocked to see that there are even torches. Then he wonders why there are torches in that place, when suddenly he sees the protagonist passing by, whistling while holding a plate of meat. Daun sees the guide and greets him with a wary hello. The nonplussed guide asks why he's still alive, until he's shocked to see a bed made of stone. Observing the table next to it, he asks how long it has been under the dungeon. A whole room with furniture, torches, and other devices. Seeing this, the irritated rabbit asks what the heck all that is. Daun takes a ball of soil from his inventory, wets it with a little water, and starts shaping it like clay until he makes a larger plate. The guide asks what he's doing. Daun places the meat on the plate he just made and says it would be rude to receive a visit empty-handed. While the protagonist cuts the meat, the guide asks if he thinks the dungeon has become his home. And then he remembers that Daun was responsible for preparing food for his group and comments that he must have plenty of food in stock or must have gained a random new skill. At that moment, the protagonist even stops cutting the meat and the rabbit asks if he really gained a new skill. Daun, a bit embarrassed, says his new skill is digging. The guide bursts into laughter and says that explains how he did all that. After stopping laughing, the rabbit says that Daun specializes in useless things, and comments that that skill is as strange as another one of purification, but at least he could laugh a bit. Then he jumps off the bench and says that now the protagonist can die. Daun asks if the guide is going to kill him. The rabbit responds indifferently, saying that the protagonist is going to die anyway, so there's no reason to get his hands dirty with him. And then he comments that they must have finished. Daun, worried, asks what has been finished. Everything starts to tremble, and the guide says that while the protagonist was playing with soil, the new participants finished Phase 1. Then he says it's a pity since it must have taken a long time to make that hideout. Daun realizes what's happening. Everything is shaking so much that it knocked down the plate with meat, and he realizes he was so focused on digging that he forgot and wonders why he didn't think of that before. The dungeon is resetting, which means everything he dug will also reset. He starts to run, dashing back to where he came from. The guide congratulates him on his persistence, but says it's too late to escape. As everything collapses, Daun falls. The rabbit keeps saying the entrance is far away and wonders why he dug so much. It seems there's no way out. Daun wonders if this is his end, while the guide remarks that he made it quite far, and adds that in the end the protagonist should have stayed put, but instead he dug his own grave. If he had stayed quiet, he wouldn't have to go through all this. However, the rabbit then notices something. The tunnel stops trembling. Daun is surprised, and the guide is also astonished, asking how this happened. Then, amazed, he wonders if the reset finished and nothing happened to that place. Next, he calls Daun a cursed bug and says the dungeon's rules seem not to apply to him. The protagonist stands up and asks if the reset is over, but the rabbit grumbles, saying he doesn't know. The guide continues to complain while Daun looks around. He notices everything is a mess, but it didn't reset. Then he wonders if it's because he's a bug. Daun then reflects on how he received the dungeon's reward being a bug, and starts to think that he's a player who isn't exactly a player. However, the irritated guide asks what he's thinking about, and tells the protagonist to enjoy the time he has because he will die sooner or later. Daun seems unfazed, but the rabbit continues trying to scare him, saying this place might collapse on the next reset, or maybe there's a monster under the ground. However, the protagonist remains unshaken, and the guide asks if he's so scared that he doesn't know how to react. Daun then asks if the guide isn't capable of killing him, and comments that if the rabbit wanted, he could simply cut off his head like he did with the other guy at the start of the game. The little rabbit gets angry and asks where he got that conclusion, then says he just doesn't cut his head off because he doesn't want to get his hands dirty. But Daun ignores him and walks away carefree, leaving the guide even more irritated, saying he's going to cut his head off. Then the protagonist lets out a smile, realizing that the rabbit really can't kill him directly. As he walks away, the guide is sweating bullets, and concludes that he's in trouble. It was exactly as Daun guessed, the guide only has permission to kill one player. But since he already used that ability at the start of the game, now he can't cause direct damage to other players. So the guide worries that Daun might actually get out and his superiors discover that it was his mistake. Meanwhile, the protagonist tries to invite the rabbit back to finish the food but says it's okay if he doesn't want to. Just at that moment, pieces of earth start falling from the tunnel wall. Suddenly, it begins to crack, and then a strong jet of water bursts onto the protagonist. A lot of water is coming in. The rabbit is happy to see that the underground water current broke the wall. Soon starts laughing, saying the water will flood everything and now the protagonist will drown. Daun thinks the reset made the cave walls fragile. Then the water starts to carry him. An intense current takes over the cave with no sign of Daun so far. But he manages to emerge from the water and quickly opens his inventory. Then he heads to the hole that opened up and says he's going to stop the leak with earth. He begins to pour the balls of earth from his inventory. Seeing this, the guide can't believe it and asks if he's serious, to which Daun immediately replies yes. As the protagonist continues to pour earth, the rabbit says he's gone mad and is now trying to stop the leak with pieces of earth. Daun says that putting one piece at a time might not be enough, but maybe it will work if he puts several. The guide makes a questioning face, and he's startled by the amount of earth. Daun begins to pour an absurd amount of earth, and the rabbit wonders why on earth he has so much earth in his inventory. The protagonist, with a determined look, thinks he should not be underestimated. He tells himself he's going to stop the leak using all the earth in his inventory. After a while, it seems he's managed to stop it, but it doesn't last long until water starts to spurt out again. Daun becomes apprehensive and realizes the earth isn't holding up against the water pressure. But he starts to think that maybe a different shape that won't disintegrate under the water pressure would be better. He remembers the system didn't say it had to be a ball, so he starts trying to change to a different shape. Meanwhile, the guide is watching, thinking the protagonist has really gone crazy. The water starts to spurt out stronger, and Daun starts to plead, almost begging for his ability to change the shape of the earth. The water is almost covering him, but he manages to make a brick-shaped earth. Even underwater, he doesn't falter and celebrates his achievement. Shortly after, the guide is incredulous. The leak has become just a drip. Daun says he thought he was going to die, and the guide still can't believe he managed to stop the leak. The exhausted protagonist says everything started to go wrong after the rabbit showed up there and asks if he's trying to sabotage him. The guide gets angry again and tells the protagonist to give up and die already. Daun says he almost died. The rabbit continues to be surprised that the protagonist stopped a big leak, and thinks to himself that not even with a combat ability would it be possible to do that. The guide starts to worry again and thinks the protagonist is too dangerous to stay alive. But suddenly, Daun calls out, and the rabbit wonders if he's accidentally become friends with him. The protagonist mentions he was worried because his water supply was running low. But thanks to the leak, a well has formed in the cave. The rabbit then says the water might be poisoned, and that Daun will get diarrhea if he drinks from it. However, the protagonist uses his purification ability, and says that now he can drink, which irritates the rabbit again. Daun looks at the well thoughtfully. The rabbit asks what he's going to do. With a smile on his face, the protagonist says that now they can put some decorations on the well. Despite the rabbit's denial, Daun starts building something anyway, and the guide is surprised to see him make a brick ledge in a matter of seconds and realizes how much his skill has improved. Daun continues to carve something on the wall and says it's the climax of the decoration, making the lion's head fountain despite the rabbit saying it looks like a cat that's been shocked. Daun places his hand on the mouth of the sculpture and uses his digging ability. Then water starts to gush from the fountain. The little rabbit is annoyed and says the protagonist is doing whatever he wants and asks why he's so unnecessarily detailed. But Daun questions if he knows how scientific that design is. He points to a pipe that connects to the water source, and says that besides helping to reduce the water pressure so it doesn't explode again, it also prevents the water from spoiling by staying still. And then with a very modest smile, Daun says that such a brilliant job could only be done by a prodigy and wonders if he deserves some achievement for it. Immediately afterward, a glow appears in front of him. The system says he has acquired the achievement of building a well with a lion's head fountain. Daun doesn't understand what that is, and the rabbit can't believe it either. The protagonist is astonished by such an achievement, while the guide can't believe there's an achievement for something so foolish. Next, the system shows that the reward is that fish will inhabit the fountain that Daun built. The protagonist is somewhat confused. The rabbit looks displeased, when suddenly a bright glow appears in the well, and in the blink of an eye, fish appear in the water. The The rabbit still refuses to believe this is possible. The protagonist celebrates mega happy because now he doesn't have to worry about dying of hunger or thirst, while the guide continues to wish he would die soon. A tear runs down Dae-Yuin's cheek, happy to have his efforts rewarded. He celebrates that the gods are helping him while the rabbit is annoyed and tells him to stop hoping. Sometime later, there's smoke in the middle of the forest, smoke coming out of a hole. Inside, Dae-Yuin is barbecuing with the spikes from the trap that almost killed him before. The guide laments that the precious dungeon trap is being used to roast meat. The protagonist wonders why he didn't think of that before, and the rabbit calls him an idiot. Dae-Yuin says he's happy to have had the idea of the barbecue. He then says the guide must be hungry too, since it was he who gave the idea of roasting the meat after cooking. But the rabbit says everyone eats like that because it gives a smoky flavor. The protagonist says the guide can get lost if he's not hungry, but the rabbit retorts that he'll only leave after seeing him dead. Despite this, Dae-Yuin thanks him and says he was sick of always eating the same thing. Then he offers a piece to the guide again, tells him to take it and thanks him again for the idea. The guide stares at the meat and soon starts to drool, but he refuses, saying he won't eat bad food like that and doesn't care if he eats it all. Dae-Yuin is a bit surprised, then says he forgot that rabbits are herbivores and apologizes, leaving the guide irritated while he explains that he does eat meat but doesn't want to. The protagonist comments that there's no grass there, making the guide threaten to kill him again. Sometime later, the meat is gone. Only a few bones are left on the ground, while the guide is watching Dae-Yuin sleep. He comments that the protagonist is very stupid and must be the most relaxed person in the history of the dungeon. Dae-Yuin starts calling Si-Young's name in his sleep, and the guide wonders what kind of dream that is. He flies away and says that Dae-Yuin is sleeping completely unprotected, while the smoke continues to rise. He says the dungeon monsters are always hungry and wonders if Dae-Yuin will survive in a cave with no way out. It's already night and the monsters are lurking. The guide with a malicious smile says he hopes Dae-Yuin had a fantastic last meal. Meanwhile, the protagonist continues to mutter words in his sleep. Suddenly, he hears the sound of a paw stepping on the bones and the giant boar monster appears. Each step shakes everything. He continues to enter the cave, until he reaches where Dae-Yuin is sleeping and ironically saying he wanted pork belly. The boar approaches and starts sniffing the protagonist, who continues in deep sleep and tells him not to touch him. Dae-Yuin says he's not angry while the monster sniffs his face, and then he punches the boar's snout, shouting that he's not angry and to eat all the meat. He looks to the side, still sleepy, and is startled to see a horned boar. Dae-Yuin starts to sweat coldly and wonders if he's still dreaming. But his doubt is confirmed as soon as the boar headbutts and completely shatters his bed. The protagonist is sure he will die with just a scratch if the monster hits him. He still tries to talk to the boar and asks if he can understand him like the rabbit, apologizing for hitting him. But the boar doesn't understand, and the protagonist realizes the monster is just hungry. He thinks to himself that he's getting tired of life or death situations and wonders why that creature appeared there. In memory, Si-Young explains that boars have absurd strength, but they're not smart, and their patterns are simple, just dodge to the side. Dae-Yuin imagines that's what Si-Young would do and wonders if he can do the same. Then he remembers that being just responsible for food, he has no combat skills. However, an idea comes to his mind. He thinks he can be quick with his ability, and he starts to manipulate the earth to build a wall in a few seconds. Then he quickly climbs the blocks and jumps as soon as the boar attacks the wall. Some pieces of earth fall from the ceiling thanks to the boar's headbutt, a devastating attack. Dae-Yuin is worried to see that the monster broke the wall as if it were nothing and reflects that his ability managed to stop that giant water leak. But the boar destroyed the wall in seconds. No wonder they call it the strongest predator of Phase 1. He is sure he will die with any mistake he makes. The monster charges at him again when Dae-Yuin opens his inventory. He thinks there's only one thing he can do. Then he starts to build another wall with the bricks and says that if one doesn't work, he will put more and more. Then he tells the boar to try its best to break it, despite not knowing how dumb the monster is. And then from the top of his construction, Dae-Yuin yells that the wall won't break easily and calls the boar that is running straight at him. The monster hits its horn hard against the wall. Then the protagonist starts to sweat coldly and lets out an uh-oh. And in a matter of seconds again, the boar destroyed the wall and knocks down Dae-Yuin. As he is falling, the protagonist realizes he underestimated the strength of the monster. The boar's attacks are very destructive. Dae-Yuin realizes that the leak will return if the monster continues breaking everything like this. His room is already completely destroyed, leaving him sad to see this since he spent so much time making it. Then Dae-Yuin opens his inventory again and says he won't be defeated easily and that it's time to use a skill he's been training. The monster stops for a second. A large piece of earth starts to come out of the protagonist's inventory. This intimidates the boar. Dae-Yuin then asks if it has ever heard of an earth bomb. Then he yells that any monster will die instantly with that attack. The monster is paralyzed, and Dae-Yuin shouts the name of his attack. But as he holds the earth bomb in his hands, he realizes something. A cloud of dust rises. Dae-Yuin threw his earth bomb, but it didn't go very far. He looks at his failure, and starts to laugh nervously, saying he messed up again. The irritated boar snorts through its nostrils. Then Daeun starts to run away from the boar, lamenting that he never had enough strength to throw the earth bomb. He starts to build small mounds of bricks to climb, but he is hit. The boar was faster. Daeun is thrown, spitting blood. Then he falls to the ground. The cave continues to shake with each attack of the monster. Daeun starts to get up trembling, and thinks to himself that it wasn't a direct attack, but hurt a lot. He calls the boar a bastard and says there's nowhere to run. Then he starts to wonder what to do, because he's sure he'll die if he can't think of something. Then Daeun starts to think that if he could kill the boar, he could use its meat to make pork barbecue, and starts to drool. Then immediately he starts to raise walls around him, and yells, calling the boar barbecue. The monster charges with everything again while the protagonist uses his digging ability. The boar was going to attack, but something happens. A hole appears under it before it could hit the wall. Daeun from above says he has to put an end to the monster's destruction. The boar falls and lets out a grunt, staring at the protagonist. Daeun says he thinks the monster doesn't understand what's going to happen. He then continues and says he's very pissed off and asks like a gangster if the boar is going to compensate him because it took a long time to build that place. The monster is now intimidated, and the protagonist then says the boar will have to pay with its body for the disrespect it had. Then Daeun says goodbye while releasing several balls of earth on the monster. Nearby was the rabbit watching the scene. He is shocked by what just happened. Then he wonders if the protagonist was really just from the artisan class, and questions if an apparently useless skill could be used in that way. While Daeun prepares his blade to make his barbecue, the guide thinks the protagonist is too creative with the skills he has and is too dangerous. The narration says that the average level of the skills of the players who cleared the first phase is level 3. The levels of the skills increase according to the frequency they are used, and when they meet certain requirements, some players can even gain new skills. The effects of the skills are absolute. In addition, to pass the phase, players must always be leveling up their skills. But it shows the guy with the axe cutting off the arm of a giant golem that even after that attack, the monster still manages to retaliate and throw the man away. While the golem regenerates its arm, the narration says that raising the levels of the skills in a life-or-death fight is not easy. Back in the cave, the rabbit has the same incredulous face as always, thinking that the digging skill is at a very high level because Daeun uses it all the time. While the protagonist is unearthing the boar, the guide thinks to himself that his skill is not even combat. Daeun spots the rabbit and calls him to see the boar. The guide already starts to get irritated, thinking that the protagonist is a pest in the dungeon. Sometime later, Daeun is sharpening his blade, and with 2 knives, he approaches the boar to start preparing the meat. While cutting, he thinks to himself that slaughter is only about speed, and that the meat can spoil if not treated soon. Within 2 hours in a room temperature place, he says his skill might be able to kill the bacteria, but spoiled meat doesn't taste good. He continues preparing the meat, removing the tendons and separating the fat. When finished, he asks the guide what he thought. The rabbit gets irritated again, saying the protagonist is very noisy and asks who he's talking to. Daeun says that if you start living alone in such a place, it gets very boring if you don't talk to yourself. The guide says he knows how he feels. The two end up feeling an unexpected empathy and look away. Outside, the day has already dawned. Daeun is scraping the boar's skull on the wall, and then makes a roasting pan using the horn as a handle. He then takes it to the fire for a test. He comments that the tendons have dried and can be used as rope, while the rabbit wonders if the protagonist is some kind of caveman. But Daeun says the best part was getting fat since oil is essential, and says the torches are almost out and he was worried about how he was going to keep them lit. He puts the fat in the pan to melt and then puts it in a glass jar, and comments that the smell is stronger than yesterday and it must be delicious. The rabbit grumbles and says the monsters will be attracted by the smell, but Daeun smiles and says he's already thought of a way. He leaves the roasting pan on the fire, steps back a bit, and pulls a spike from his inventory, leaving the spike on the ground. The protagonist then says the rabbit said the other day that falling into that trap is certain death, and says he can use that trap for hunting. The rabbit makes a face of displeasure while Daeun says he saves some spikes in the inventory, but they reappear with each reset. Then he finishes placing the spikes on the ground and asks what he thought. The guide says the monsters are not idiots, and they won't come with the protagonist saying there's a trap there. Daeun says that from now on there will be something to eat every day, and when the guide asks what he's talking about, the protagonist says that with the smell of pork barbecue, another type of monster might fall in there. Right after that, they hear a noise. The rabbit looks in disbelief. There at the opening of the hole is another boar, and the guide already starts saying that it's not a place for him to enter. But it's no use, and the creature jumps into the hole. The rabbit yells, calling him a stupid pig. When falling, the boar causes a rumble that raises a lot of dust. Daeun looks and celebrates seeing that his plan worked and that he caught another one. The guy gets irritated and starts asking why the hell the boar jumped. Daeun, almost drooling, gives a little laugh and says he won't have to worry about food anymore, while the rabbit keeps repeating that he hates him. Time passes in a new season, and soon there's another boar at the edge of the hole. He was attracted by the smell and drools from above, seeing Daeun's barbecue, and smelling that succulent meat he can't resist, and jumps all in without knowing he's going straight to his death. When he falls down there, he starts to grunt, and when he looks up, there is Daeun saying he is bigger than yesterday's boar. The protagonist, all happy and humming, welcomes him. Daeun is by the fire roasting the meat. When he goes to get another piece in the bowl, he hears a rumble, and everything shakes. However, the protagonist looks unconcerned, and then he sees that he caught another one and says they are not smart, and that he's getting tired of them showing up all the time. And then he says they could at least make their meat taste bad since he's starting to get fat from eating so much. But suddenly a glow appears around him. Meanwhile, somewhere else, someone holding two blood-soaked swords says it's over. It's Seonju almost died this time. His group appears asking if he's hurt. He says he's fine and asks if the group is okay. The other group members are amazed to see a mountain of boars that Seon killed alone. He says he was fortunately not hurt and asks how things went on the side where Ehowayeol Hyunjin went. Hoayeol is the guy who uses an axe. He says he had a lot of people with him and apologizes for having separated from Seonji and for not being able to help. Seong says it's okay and that he won something. Then he says he killed 100 horned boars and gained his skill. The system shows the achievement, Horned Boar Slayer, and the reward is the skill strength of the horned boar. Everyone in the group is surprised that there is such a skill. Seon explains that the skill is limited as it lasts 10 seconds and has a cooldown of 100. But then one of his colleagues comments that the skill increases strength and vitality. Hoyeol says it's an incredible skill, and that Seonji is becoming a monster. But Seonji is embarrassed to hear such praise. The archer boy happily celebrates, saying that such a skill is amazing, like putting wings on the back of a tiger. He says he's happy that Seonji is on their side. Hoyeol comments that the duration should increase and the cooldown should decrease as the levels pass. The archer boy hugs Seong, and this makes him embarrassed. However, the celebration is interrupted by a noise. Seong then says they have to go back to the cave. The boy says it's a waste to leave the boars like that, and comments that they would get a lot of meat if they clean the boars. The guy with glasses asks when was the last time they ate meat and comments that it's frustrating that all monsters have toxins, then says it's as if they're being told to die of hunger since there's not much food but there are many monsters. The archer boy comments that if only Daeun were there he could purify the meat. But Hoyeol yells the boy's name, Eun Sasu. The boy is a bit embarrassed and says he only thought of Daeun as a cook and didn't think losing him would be so problematic. Seong asks if he really thinks that and says the goal of the game is not to win fights but to survive. And then he says that from that point of view the combat class is the most necessary because it has a clear goal and rewards. But then he asks what happened on the days they couldn't fight, remembering how Daeun distributed help to everyone when they were exhausted. He delivered the food with a smile on his face. Siramman says the protagonist was fighting for them at those times, and says he was the strongest among them all. Hoyeol shows a sharpening stone made by Daeun and says he would have died with a blunt axe if it weren't for it. Yoon apologizes and says he won't say that kind of thing again. Seong smiles and tells them to return. The group gets excited and talks about eating potatoes, but soon remembers that it was also Daeun who got the potatoes and realized that everything is related to him. Back in the cave, there's meat being roasted, and the protagonist, with a gleam in his eyes, celebrates, saying this is what lifestyle is all about. But the guide complains, saying he is too noisy, and asks if he has been possessed by some chatty ghost. Daeun, with his mouth full, says that apparently the rabbit doesn't know the joy of eating and says that reaction is important when eating something tasty. He starts to say something, but says the guide wouldn't know, then the little rabbit says he does. Daeun asks if he already knew that you can't eat horned boar because it has toxins, and says that if you use the purification ability on the meat, the toxins disappear and only a slightly bitter taste remains. This means it's good even without salt. The guy gets annoyed and says he doesn't need to know these nonsensical things and that one day he will kill him. But the protagonist starts to laugh. Then another rumble happens. Daeun sees that another boar has fallen into the trap. The guy gets even more irritated and says those stupid pigs should have stopped jumping there by now. The protagonist says maybe their brains also reset and says he's tired because 2 or 3 jump there every day after the reset. The rabbit says he's going to go crazy, and then he's surprised. It's astonished to see Daeun lift the boar and starts asking when he got so strong. The protagonist says it's a skill and tells the guide to keep turning the meat so it doesn't burn. The rabbit is astonished and asks about the skill. Then he says the skill was the strength of the horned boar and says he'll be right back. The guide is totally disbelieving and wonders if the protagonist is talking about the Horned Boar Slayer achievement. Then he wonders how someone with a useless class got it, while Daeun carries the giant boar as if it were nothing. Daeun climbs out of the hole and comments that he should build some kind of entrance. When he gets to the top, he is startled to see the rabbit looking downcast and asks what happened. The guide, completely dumbfounded, asks if the skill the protagonist mentioned was from the Horned Boar Slayer achievement. Daeyun says yes, and the rabbit says it's impossible because you can only get it after killing 100 boars. The protagonist then explains that he caught the 100 boars with a trap. The rabbit says something is wrong because the dungeon has reset several times. Daeyun asks what that has to do with it, and the guide replies that when the dungeon resets, the count also resets, and that there are only about 40 boars up there. The protagonist with a silly face comments that it seems his numbers stay the same even with the resets and asks if that wasn't supposed to happen. The little rabbit gets irritated and calls him a bug human while Daeyun wonders if all the monsters he kills will count. Thinking he might get another achievement when he kills 100 more, he reflects that it would be difficult to do without a group. The guy gets irritated and says the protagonist is starting to look like a pig now that he's eating them every day. Daeyun asks if there's a weight change system, but the rabbit doesn't know. Meanwhile, outside, it's a beautiful day. On a tree branch, a squirrel walks near a nest. He is gnawing on a bone until he accidentally drops it. Then he quickly descends from the tree. But when he gets down, he sees a hole in the ground near the tree, and he tenses up when he realizes his bone fell straight into that hole. He stares a bit before entering. After a while, he comes out of a small hole that leads directly into the protagonist's cave. He starts to explore, looking around, and when he gets to the kitchen, he is surprised to see all that. A little further ahead, he finds his bone, and he runs to grab it. But he is surprised to see the carcass of a horned boar. It was love at first sight. Sometime later, he returns to the tree all excited, with a twinkle in his eyes. More time passed and he returned to the hole, and this repeated day and night, without the other squirrels knowing. It had become routine. He entered the cave all calm, and there were always more bones there. So he ate them all, until he saw something, a bowl full of bones, and he went straight to eat what was in it too. He picked up a bone from the bowl without hesitation. He was a little intrigued by it, but it only took one bite to feel a flavor explosion, and he was ecstatic. He soon started eating more and more amazed. He continued eating the bones from the bowl, until he notices something. The bowl was on top of the protagonist. Then he is worried when he remembers the old squirrel teaching that humans are dangerous, and he starts to leave, afraid that the protagonist will get up and attack him. But the temptation of the bowl is too strong. He tries to resist. He makes a determined look, focused, but he goes back to eating the bones. Daeyun, who was pretending to sleep, sees this and is happy. Then he celebrates that he found another living being after spending months living alone in that cave, and says it's good that the squirrel feeds on bones because he is very careful and didn't know how to approach him. While Daeyun is being careful thinking about how to make friends, the squirrel realizes he is awake. The protagonist worries that he might run away, but the squirrel continues eating the bones. Daeyun is moved by so much cuteness, so he slowly tries to pet him. The little squirrel notices and lets him. Daeyun is all happy that it worked, and again a glow appears. The system shows the achievement of Earth's squirrel friend for having tamed the little squirrel, and then says the dungeon admires this unexpected friendship. Daeyun wonders if they give these things out regularly and remembers that when he was with the group he couldn't get any. Then he thinks about his new achievement and says he doesn't know if it's worth anything, but thanks the little squirrel for calling him a friend. Then he starts thinking about using POKKYU as the name of the little animal, since that's the sound it makes. The little squirrel seems to like the name. Daeyun is astonished to see that POKKYU apparently understands him and wonders if it's the reward for the achievement. Then he tells the little squirrel to sit and even thinks that maybe it's hard for him to understand. But POKKYU sits down right after. He is impressed to see that the squirrel really understands him and even asks him to hold his hand. And then he asks POKKYU. At that instant, the squirrel jumps from his hand. Daeyun wonders if he didn't understand. But POKKYU waits for the protagonist, and then points in the direction indicating for Daeyun to follow him. The protagonist then sees the wall through which POKKYU entered and uses his digging ability to enlarge the hole. As he climbs through the tunnel, he wonders if the squirrel noticed that entrance because it's smaller. Then he remembers that every time he tried to dig an exit, he ended up facing stone walls. Daeyun dug several tunnels looking for an exit and was almost giving up. However, he is surprised when he notices something. It is already possible to see a tree root where POKKYU entered. Then Daeyun gets emotional to see that he will finally be able to get out, and soon celebrates saying that he will finally be able to have some hope. He knows that if he climbs the roots he will be able to get outside. As he continues climbing, the protagonist is excited because he will finally be able to end this life under the earth. He can already see the sunlight, so he keeps climbing. After so much time, he finally can see the outside world again, with birds singing in the sky and the soft grass on the ground. Daeyun can't contain himself with that view, and starts to cry with emotion for finally being able to see the sky full of clouds and grass that seems endless. He says it's just a normal landscape with some sheep, but it seems so different. While he says it's welcoming and friendly, his speech is interrupted when he sees one of the little sheep suddenly attacked. by a fierce wolf. Da-Yuan gets nervous and says that survival of the fittest is also part of nature, while there are several predatory looks in the forest. As the other wolves start to move, he thinks the feeling of being alive didn't need to be so realistic. The protagonist starts to sweat coldly and turns pale because he knows that packs of wolves are known for having no mercy, and then thinks it's unfair to die right after escaping. The wolves start to growl and go on the attack. Da-Yuan already prepares for the worst. Then he crouches, but the wolves pass straight by. He doesn't understand, and he is relieved because the wolves were focused on the sheep and didn't see him. He asks if POKKYU knows another way because that place doesn't seem safe. But right behind him, another wolf appears. Da-Yuan tries to stay calm, thinking that this one's attention is also on the sheep, but the wolf has its eye on the protagonist. Da-Yuan runs back through the hole, yelling at the wolf and calling it an idiot. The protagonist says the entrance is too tight for the monster to enter, but it didn't take long for the wolf to break everything and manage to enter. At that moment, despair hits Da-Yuan, who keeps running and apologizing for calling the monster an idiot. He realizes the tunnels are too narrow and there's no escape. Then Da-Yuan opens the inventory and decides that since it's just one wolf, he will finish it off. And he starts to build a wall, thinking that compared to the boar, the wolf is much weaker. But before he could finish his thought, the wolf leaps and attacks him, which draws blood from Da-Yuan. He can't believe it. The wolf is extremely fast. Da-Yuan realizes his situation is bad. The wolf missed that blow but will attack again. The protagonist wonders if he will be able to escape or if there's another way. And then he realizes he won't be able to run for long and that he has to end this. Then an idea comes to his mind. He says he still has that, and there's nothing more he can do. The wolf leaps to attack him again. Da-Yuan says it's him or the monster while the blue aura begins to emanate. Then he lands a powerful punch on the wolf after activating the strength of the horned boar. The monster is thrown far away with Da-Yuan's punch. He is even impressed and wonders if he hit. He realizes the effect of the skill is incredible. The system shows that his physical attributes will be temporarily doubled. Then Da-Yuan confirms that now that he tried to fight, he knows his skill is indeed incredible. But the wolf gets up angry. The protagonist knows he managed to damage the monster, but he is sad it wasn't a one-hit kill. The system shows there are 7 seconds left of the skill, and Da-Yuan thinks to himself that the duration is his biggest weakness. And then with 6 seconds left, he has no time to waste and charges with everything. The wolf prepares for the attack, but Da-Yuan is faster and manages to jump and dodge to the side of the monster. Before the wolf could react, the protagonist lands another powerful punch on the wolf's ribs, and with a determined look, he hopes the monster dies. Da-Yuan continues to deliver a barrage of punches, so many punches that dust rises even from the outside. The protagonist is already tired, and the system shows there are still 3 seconds left, but the wolf is still standing. Again it charges, but Da-Yuan manages to dodge with a leap. Then he quickly opens the inventory, pulls one of the spikes while there are 2 seconds left, and yells for the wolf to die already as he prepares to attack with the spike. The monster growls at him, but Da-Yuan manages to hit the spike on the wolf, but the monster attacks him with its tail. This attack ends up throwing the protagonist against the wall. Even with the spike embedded in its neck, the wolf is still alive, while Da-Yuan wonders how this damn thing has so much energy, and says this won't end easily. The system shows that the strength of the boar is on a cooldown of 99 seconds. The wolf stares at him angrily, but Da-Yuan has understood the pattern of the monster. Its most dangerous attack is when it leaps to slash using its front claws, but after that, this attack is on cooldown. The protagonist asks if they can't have a truce for just 90 seconds, but the wolf launches another attack. As Da-Yuan prepares to launch his last attack, the monster is about to bite him. At that moment, the protagonist says he should have used his paw. Then before the wolf could bite him, Da-Yuan uses the digging ability right into the wolf's mouth, and the monster is caught by surprise. Sometime later in the cave, the guide appears wondering what happened since the protagonist isn't making meat. He says something is wrong, and says that Da-Yuan must be doing something bad until he finds him. The rabbit can't believe that the protagonist is dressed in bone armor. Da-Yuan says the armor turned out quite good for something made in a day. He says he made it because many dangerous things happen these days. The guide is shocked to see the skull of a plains wolf and wonders if Da-Yuan finally found a way up there. The protagonist says yes, and the rabbit already asks why he is still there. Then he says it must be because that place is comfortable and tells Da-Yuan to keep living there. Then he comments that the protagonist even got a little pet, but Da-Yuan determined says he will leave. However, he cannot leave without preparing as he only survived by pure luck. Because of the danger, the rabbit tells him to stay there. Then Da-Yuan says he still plans to use the base for a while. Now that the problems are clear, he needs to start making his preparations. The rabbit asks Da-Yuan to just give up and die, but ends up leaving the protagonist in a good mood, and the rabbit calls him a curse bug. Sometime later, Da-Yuan is training with the strength of the boar, lifting weights. and running while thinking to himself that the more he increases his physical stats, the stronger the skill's increase will be. Since he is using the skill a lot, the system shows that its level has increased and even the duration and cooldown have improved. Daeun reflects that he was lucky last time, but wolves move in packs, and even if he tries to face them one by one, there are no guarantees that it will work. He uses a slaughtered boar as a punching bag, while thinking that he has to get stronger. The system shows that the strength of the boar has risen to level 3, making the physical stats stronger, the duration longer, and the cooldown shorter again. Then he activates the skill and delivers a series of punches to the boar. Daeun lands a powerful punch. With a determined look, he says he will no longer run away. In the forests, some wolves are quite carefree until they notice something coming their way. Suddenly, Daeun jumps out of the bushes. He's happy to find only 2 wolves. Then the protagonist activates the strength of the boar and throws a thorn at one of them. The other manages to dodge and already advances towards Daeun. He then says he will show the result of his training and lands a punch that makes the monster fly and hit a tree. The impact was so strong that it destroyed the tree. Right behind the protagonist appears the first wolf about to bite him, but he has already noticed and says he knew it wouldn't die with just one hit. Then he lands another punch on the wolf and says he will hit it as many times as necessary. While the monster is thrown to the ground, the second wolf gets up. During the fight, the guide realizes that he has become very strong, and Daeun himself feels full of power and wonders if this feeling means he is strong. He then says he feels he won't lose and wonders if he has become unbelievably strong. But the rabbit cuts his wave and says he's not that much since Seoeng could kill 10 wolves in a second. Daeun says anyone is weak compared to Seoeng, but the rabbit says the boy Jian-du killed 3 wolves alone. Suddenly, one of the wolves starts to howl, and the rabbit mocks the protagonist, saying that now the pack is coming. He warns that about 3 wolves are coming and that Daeun is lucky because usually there are more than 5. Then he asks if the protagonist will be able to defeat them all before the skill's time runs out and asks him to show his power. Daeun then asks if the guide knows what the best part of his skill is. Then he says it's the increase in physical stats that is now 2.4x, which means he can run away 2.4x faster than normal. The guide is incredulous and asks if he's really going to run away. Then he asks if the protagonist doesn't have the honor to face them, but Daeun says he only cares about something called life. Right after that, he jumps back into the cave hole. The rabbit says that usually players get obsessed and fight so much that they end up dying. Then he gets angry and tells the wolves to attack that hole. But Daeun makes an earth wall and prevents them from entering. The monsters even try to dig, but it doesn't work, leaving the guide trembling with rage. He yells, calling the protagonist a damned bug player, and swears that one day he will kill him. Inside the cave, Daeun says he managed to find some isolated wolves thanks to POK, but now that they are in a pack, it's not easy to deal with, and then wonders what to do. He made 7 escape routes in the area where there are no stone walls, and now knows he can withstand fighting more than 2 wolves. But he is worried that something unexpected will happen like last time, and he won't be able to close the entrance in time. Even if he flees to the hole, there's nowhere he can hide. So he tells POKKYU that he has no choice but to need his help. Daeun asks his little squirrel to find the wolves that have separated from the pack, and tells him not to get too close and to be careful. Then he says he will start the preparations. Outside, there are 3 wolves that have just hunted a sheep. Daeun is going to put his plan into practice and says the distance is perfect. Then he opens the inventory. Meanwhile, the guide is watching, asking if he is some kind of mole for having made so many holes in the region. The protagonist says the rabbit has this horrible habit of appearing behind people. The guide then grumbles and says the most important thing is to know what Daeun is going to do, and asks if he's going to shoot a laser beam or something like that. Then the protagonist says it's almost that and says this is his long-range combat art. The rabbit says he doesn't have any such skill, but Daeun says it's possible to throw earth balls using the strength of the boar. Then he activates the skill and throws a thorn as if it were a spear, saying this is the safety first attack. The wolves are far away and unconcerned, until the attack passes close but doesn't hit any of the monsters. The rabbit starts laughing and asks if Daeun didn't mean wolves safety first. The protagonist throws another spear and misses again. Then the guide says it looks like it's going to end in hand-to-hand combat, and that's what they call lack of experience. The plains wolves have the highest agility in Phase 1, and that distance is no problem for them. Daeun then says that despite this, they can't dodge in the air. So he throws the earth balls and says it's going as he planned. The guide asks if he really thinks this is going to work, and says there's no point in trying to buy time with earth balls because they'll destroy them in an instant. But a ball hits the wolf right in the face. The guide is astonished and can't believe it. Daeun says the rabbit is underestimating the balls too much and that earth is heavier than he thinks. Then he says he used his digging ability to increase their density to the point of weighing 20 kilograms, and with the strength of the boar, he can throw them as if they were bowling balls. The guide is again shocked and can't believe those balls weigh 20 kilograms. In a few seconds, Daeun managed to knock down 2 wolves. Only the last one remains. Then the rabbit comments that wolves hunt in groups and they have good teamwork, while Daeun has his back turned. The third wolf leaps and attacks from behind while the guide thinks it was checkmate. However, he managed to defend himself from the attack by placing his arms in the way, but he was still thrown far away while the wolf waited to see what happened. Still recovering from the beast's charge, he didn't notice that the wolf was approaching to feast on him, and the rabbit celebrated because he wanted that annoying player to go to heaven soon. Hoping, the rabbit asked the wolf to attack him immediately and finish the guy off. The rabbit laughed at the scene as the good sadist he is. Daeun was now inside the wolf's jaws. As the fierce attack continued, the rabbit watched everything from afar, hoping that things would go as he planned. However, something unexpected happened. The wolf felt its teeth breaking. The rabbit, observing the scene, expected anything but that. Daeun's armor was more resistant than the beast's teeth and caused them to break when biting him. Taking advantage of the distraction, he managed to move his arms enough to free himself a bit from that dangerous mouth. He was finally in a safer position while the wolf tried to recover from the damage inflicted on itself. Daeun was pleased with the effectiveness of that armor, and if it weren't for it, he would have become a snack. The horned boars are the most powerful beasts of that level. The wolf's fangs are nothing compared to those bones. Even so, the force was felt by the guy's body and he suffered moderate damage. The status window signaled that he still had 8 seconds to use the boar's ability. At that moment, he tried to regain his calm to plan an attack. The time was more than enough, and he started manipulating something in his hands. Daeun, with the earth sphere, assumed a posture to throw it at the wolf. Finally, he was prepared to do it. With the wolf in his sights, Daeun threw the projectile towards the injured wolf. A great explosion occurred in the forest. The rabbit, still watching, didn't like the way things had turned out. He then asked if the guy had finished off the wolf that lay in front of him. Definitely, this was not the result desired by the rabbit, who wanted the player in the wolf's place. Daeun's strategy was to use a chain of tunnels, attack stray wolves, and then flee. That strategy is definitely efficient, but at a certain point they began to be vigilant with the tunnels. They just didn't expect to be watched by the squirrel, who promptly relayed the information to his friend. Using it, he took the opportunity to train when an attack became too risky. The training caused his skill to level up more and more until the wolves were no longer able to resist. The forest apparently was at peace, but within it, Daeun was controlling the wolf population. The rabbit couldn't believe that human was still alive. The anger he felt for him only grew, as did the desire to resolve the situation himself. And he said the guy was a coward for the way he attacked them. But his armor was already almost completely destroyed and it was necessary to keep him safe. He decided to discard it and might make another one in the future. Who knows? Daeun noticed that the day was very calm, and they should have already arrived because of the howls, for he knew he hadn't finished off all the wolves in the forest. The rabbit was completely unable to hide his annoyance, and Daeun asked what was wrong with him. Then he happily asked if he had finished off all the wolves. The rabbit said he was a coward and would soon die while he celebrated being able to deal with all the wolves. And he also said that if he found other players, he should tell them where they were, but the rabbit wished he would perish and said he wouldn't do that. Daeun celebrated the success of his strategy and was now ready to move on to the next step. He needed to defeat the boss but knew he couldn't do it alone. So he needed to find more players and join them. Now he was in the Plains Forest. With 10 days left until the reset, he imagined they would soon pass through there. But he recognized that it would be problematic if they were far away. A loud sound echoed through the forest. In the middle of it, there was a small clearing. In that clearing, a group of players was confronting a pack of wolves. They knew the wolves were fierce, and on that occasion, there were many of them. One of the players blamed the situation on his colleague and they argued. The rabbit passed by there, completely downcast. He looked at the group of players and realized they were having the expected tense behavior. To him, that was what was missing in the dungeon. More tension. The wolves advanced towards the people. The rabbit rejoiced in the scene and hoped the pack would take care of everyone. He wanted no player to remain so that Daeun would have no hope of getting out of there or living for long. One of the wolves is thrown far away. A player with an axe is responsible for it, and it was just as the rabbit imagined. Not everyone is weak. He noticed that the old man was hiding an ability for emergency situations. Wind Blade. The stronger the weapon is swung, the more damage it inflicts. However, this is an ability that can also hit allies. The players ask him to restrain himself as he could hit them too, but the old man ignores them. Either he does that or everyone becomes a snack. Only the strongest survive. The rabbit loved it. This was the spirit of the dungeon. The most cruel monsters are always the humans. The rabbit hopes that the reckless one ends up killing all of his allies because if everyone dies, Daeun will be left alone. But the guy is planning his life thinking he should go to a higher place. Daeun is happy to have gotten out but doesn't know what to do now, and the rabbit won't take him to them. He asks Pakyu if he can imagine where the others might be. He wants to know where the humans are, and the squirrel becomes thoughtful. But he gave up insisting because he knows his friend doesn't know everything. He can't search because it might put him in danger, but he also can't face the boss alone. He thinks about building something to help him find them, like an observatory. It's a waste to think too much and not execute, and he is confident in his building skills. And for that, he'll need to get above the tree canopy. So he started summoning earth bricks. The walls will be made of earth, and it will be easier to do since he has experience with the material. It might collapse since there's no cement, but he learned a technique that could reduce this risk. He brings his hand close to the bricks. He can change the shape of the object with his hand and intends to fuse the bricks with his digging technique. It's not a stack of bricks, but rather earth, and it won't collapse so easily. By the end of the day, he managed to accomplish a lot and was quite tired. In about 10 hours, he completed the task. He looks up at the sky from where he stands, and he contemplates the beauty of the forming twilight. Far away, blood flies through the sky. The rabbit roots for the conflict and says they'll need that food if they want to fight tomorrow. He is pleased that the players have adapted well to the game, and he comes across a type of person he doesn't like who is looting a body. He thinks that this player must have many items in his inventory. The guy doesn't know, and the rabbit introduces himself as the guide of all this. He said he hadn't spoken to him, but that construction wasn't there yesterday. It's the first time the rabbit sees something like this. He is upset, and only one person there could be capable of that. At the top of the tower, Dalvin is building something else tired. His hands are quite shaky, and he finally completes that small object. The rabbit appears beside him and asks what he is doing. He says that he scared him and that it's important, and that the rabbit should be working. But he says Dalvin only does things that hinder his work. He said that Dalvin has a lot of free time and that now he stopped making tunnels and is making towers. Dalvin asks the rabbit how long he thinks it took him to make that tower. He said it only took 4 hours, and the rabbit didn't believe it. It was difficult at first, but it got easier with the skills he acquired through achievements. Just with that tower, there were 2. The first was as an observatory. Everything he sees from there appears on his map, and he shows it to the rabbit. It's updated in real time and even differentiates hostile monsters and players for neutral people. The rabbit doesn't believe it, and Dalvin said he has already tested it. Now he wants to know what other achievement he obtained. He imagines he got it when he finished the 5th tower. A beam of light appeared. Builder's reward, a new building skill, was granted to him, and the construction time was reduced by half. He said it helped him so much that he didn't even need to rest. With the skill, he builds so quickly that he can invest his time in interior decoration. He pointed to a place where he said he would put the bed, much to the rabbit's displeasure. He imagines Dylan has completely lost his mind since he is getting so many achievements. If he finds other players, they could turn that into a giant park, and the rabbit doesn't want that to happen. He is too dangerous alone and will make sure he stays that way. Dalvin asks if the rabbit is already leaving, and asks him where he can find more people because he hasn't found anyone yet. The next day, the players observe the tower that wasn't there the previous day. The rabbit appears near them and gives a sinister laugh. He tells them to follow him to the tower because he has a surprise for them. One of them says the rabbit is a liar and shouldn't be listened to. He must be leading them to a powerful monster, so they should change their path. The rabbit pretends to be innocent and says it took him a long time to prepare that. But they change their path, and the rabbit is happy to have fooled them. He continued doing this so Delon wouldn't find other players, and allowed them to take the easier path just to buy time. Maybe this way Delon would perish. Now the time has come to finish them all. Delon analyzes tracks on the ground, but it's just a group of monsters. But something on the map catches his attention. There were many signals on the map now. 10 signals appeared there suddenly. Then even more appeared, so many that he couldn't count them. Delon is scared because he can't imagine what it could be. A monstrous rat is running, and with it, there's a horde of other rats. They are advancing through the forest without stopping, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The trees tremble with their advance. If Dalon had taken any longer, he would be in trouble and is glad to be near his tower. Every 4 weeks after the reset, the rats descend from the mountains, devouring everything in their path. Dalon had been counting the days for this, but forgot for a brief moment. Another reset is on the way, and it's at this moment that he has an epiphany. If players don't appear on the map, it's because they've died or moved on to the next stage. He thinks he can stop looking for them now and head to the beginning. The squirrel tries to say something to him and makes a funny face. Dalon says they don't need to worry about the rats. They just need to pay attention to the map. A large gate stands before them. The players, despite the adversities, have managed to reach it, but they don't know how to defeat that enormous golem. Swords are useless against it. The golem prepares to attack them. The bald guy says he's going to take down the golem because he's very tough. He gets ready to strike the golem with his mace. The other players are stunned by the scene. The weapon was on the ground, and there was a lot of tomato sauce. The monster advances unstoppably towards them. The player is terrified by this, because he imagines there's nothing he can do against it. He asks for God's help. The golem is ready to finish him off, but something hits it from the side. The golem's hand fell with that impact. The player gives thanks, but the woman tells him to look in the direction of the attack. A brick was flying through the sky. Dalon has arrived and is using the boar's strength to throw bricks. This golem is different from the map monsters, so it's possible that it's the boss. The player doesn't know why Delon is so strong, and the woman asks him to be careful. The golem continues attacking with its remaining hand. Delon prepares to throw another brick. This time it hits the side of the monster's head. A large hole was formed. Now it turns towards Delon. The golem is enraged by this trick. Delon realizes that it might be better to run now. The golem is fast and is already very close to him. Dalan doesn't know what to do now, and he remembered when they defeated the boar. They stretched a rope across his path, causing the beast to fall, and so they managed to strike its vulnerable belly. Dalan said that it was very well planned. Sung said it was nothing and uttered a cliche phrase. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Dalan throws another brick at the golem. This one hits its leg at knee height. Dalan waits for the impact's result. The other players watch, very surprised. The golem began to fall to the ground. Dalan is pleased with the result and thanks Sung for the advice. The golem tries to get up after the fall. It doesn't move and must be trying to regenerate its missing leg.